How many of you have ever been to like a bar bat mitzvah? Yay, right? So I'm not the first rabbi you've ever seen, right? So I'm so happy to be here, and I want to introduce our speaker, but you will know her because she's a person that lets herself be known. We all know what that means, right? Some speakers come and keep you at arm's length. This speaker is going to come and introduce you to her world and who she is, and you will have a sense that you will know her, and she cares about knowing you. So she'll care about the questions that you ask her. But I want to talk to you first about two little things that I think are huge before we introduce the speaker. The first is your Center on Justice and Reconciliation. I hope all of you have taken advantage of learning about it and working with it, because what does our world need? Really, two things our world needs, right? Terribly, okay, love, yeah. But justice, right? We need a little love. Justice and reconciliation. And on this very campus, you have a center of justice and reconciliation that is led by Dr. Jamie Gates and his vision. And he takes that justice and reconciliation into the community. He works with us. He's the president of our board of directors, but he walks his talk. He walks his faith. And he's really an emissary in some ways, though my tradition wouldn't describe it that way. He's a missionary for this university into Greater San Diego. And I am so proud that he is my colleague, but I'm also prouder still that he has introduced us to students, that he has introduced us to the work of this university, that he's introduced us to the Center of Justice and Reconciliation. And I'm like a nice Jewish girl, and I can tell you what a Nazarene is. So that's actually kind of cool, don't you think? And a lot of that is because Jamie Gates has said we don't just want to be an institution on the hill. We want to be the hands of God in urban San Diego. So that leads me to the next point, and I'm not a paid advertiser. How many here have participated in Urban Term? I know you, so I can point you all out, and you're in the picture. If you haven't participated in Urban Term, which takes place in the summer, and I think you should talk to the ones who have, I think it's like a week and a half the way people live together and really learn how to function as a community together. I can tell you as an outsider, the students who participate in Urban Term, not only do they have a summer that shapes them for the rest of their lives, but they do work that is meaningful and memorable in the community, and they get to know each other in a way that you hardly have a chance to get to know other human beings, and make relationships that are like siblings and cousins, that you may not always like what they do, but they're deep and profound in people who walk with you. So I want to give a shout out to this Urban Tournament. If you haven't done it, really look into it. It will be the 7th Urban Term, and in Jewish tradition, 7 is the perfect number. So the others may have been good, but this one's going to be amazing. So now, Lorena Gonzalez is the #1 labor leader in San Diego. She's like the grand poobah, if you watch the Flintstones. She's it. She's the cat's pajamas. And you walk into her office, and what do you expect to be all over her desk? The first thing you see, and this is hers, is the Poverty and Justice Bible. That's what's sitting on the front of her desk. And anyone who walks into her office, the first thing that they see is the Poverty and Justice Bible. And what's in the Poverty and Justice Bible? Every section where Jesus talks about the poor and our commitment to the poor, to changing the world, is underlined in this Bible. It is the book that she carries with her. It is the walk that she walks, because as a woman of faith, and she'll tell you about this, from the time she was a child until now, she thought that she was going to be someone who had an opportunity, who had been given an opportunity to change the world. To change the world. It's sort of a lofty calling. And she calls it a calling. Oh my gosh, a labor leader with a calling. You know, how incredible is that? And so even as a young woman, her drive for her education, which took place at my alma mater at Stanford University, just a few years after I was there. And then she entered a doctoral program at George Washington University and got her master's, and fortunately for us, ended up in law school at UCLA, and then in San Diego, where she's from, in North County, San Diego. She finally landed in a place where she knew she could make the difference in the lives of people who have no voice, people who have a voice, and people who can use their voice to join her in championing a more just economic, a just a just San Diego that pursues economic justice for the people who work here through the San Diego labor movement. And so it's really fun for me to introduce San Diego's labor boss. When I was a little girl, a labor boss looked a little more like him. That is Reverend Richard Lawrence, who actually walked with Martin Luther King in the early era of the civil rights movement. And if you have a chance to talk to him, he would be a very good person to speak with. But labor leaders looked like him. They had, almost like him, they had a big cigar, and they looked like men. And today, in today's world, people who are committed to the labor movement are elected by their unions and by the Federation of Unions here in San Diego. They have to hold their office because it's a democratic office. They run for re-election, which means they have to be doing what to their constituents? Listening. And they advocate for justice, not just for union workers, but for workers everywhere in San Diego, to lift up the lives and the livelihoods of people who only want to make a living, raise their children, perhaps go to a Little League game and put braces on their kids' teeth, and to be able to work maybe one job, if not one job, not 2 or 3 jobs, and have justice in their workplace. So I'd like to introduce you to San Diego's own Lorena Gonzalez. All
right, I'm not going to use the microphone, but you guys can tell me if am I loud enough for everybody? Is that right? I'm sorry? Oh, are you guys okay in the back? You can hear me? Yeah. All right. So my name is Lorena Gonzalez. First of all, thank you for inviting me. I'm always excited. I had dinner before this talking to young people because actually in the labor movement, I'm considered really young, actually. I make fun of myself now because I'm not that young, and I always have to tell people when I'm the youngest person in the room, it's pretty sad, but I'm always the youngest person in the room. So it's exciting for me to be able to speak to truly young people because the labor movement, if anything, does need new young blood. So hopefully tell you a little bit about how many people know what unions are. Who can name a union leader? A labor leader. All right.
My old union president, John Gage, American Federation of Government Employees.
Still the head of
He's
AFG.
International Gage.
Yes.
Yeah. Gage.
He wears tennis shoes with
Yes.
suits. I was actually just at, the funny thing is, I was at a meeting with the President of the United States and your old union president, and I looked down and he was wearing Converse with a suit. So I think that's part of his... No, but it was funny. Well, nobody else can name even one labor leader.
Big Bill Hayward?
Huh?
Big Bill Hayward?
No, that's an odd one. All right, I was thinking more like Cesar Chavez. Like usually that's usually what I get when I speak to folks, because that's usually what people think of, if anyone, right? Yes. And he was a labor leader, but a lot of people have even forgotten that because he's kind of presented as something else. So after this, hopefully you'll learn a little bit more. I'm not going to name labor leaders for you. That's no fun. A lot of them don't have a lot of relevance in our lives. That was a random one, though.
Really?
Yeah, I have never heard that one. I mean, I've heard, never in class with somebody. Usually it's Cesar Chavez. Once in a while, they'll know one or two others. Samuel Gompers, something that they read somewhere in history. Jimmy Hoffa is the one I hear a lot. I'm a Teamster, so it means a lot to me. So I grew up in northern San Diego County in Vista. Does anyone know where Vista is? So Vista is like really progressive area of San Diego County. I was saying that tongue in cheek if you've never been there. It's a fun place, especially growing up as a Latina. I was raised in Vista. I'm the daughter of an immigrant farm worker and a nurse, and my mom basically raised me and my 2 brothers as a single mom, and really taught us in kind of a tradition of faith that our meaning in life would be to serve others. I mean, there was no question as we were raised, and as the product came out, I am a labor leader. My oldest brother was a teacher, and my middle brother is an environmental attorney. And so I think she pretty much did some kind of magic into our heads, but a lot of that was based in our faith. And a kind of strategy that she always used with us, we were raised in the Catholic faith. I now attend Methodist church just because sometimes you get a little schizophrenic, right? But still consider myself a Catholic. But she taught us what was important about the Bible were the written words in the Bible, right? That which Jesus said. And that, a lot of times in life you're going to go through, especially with different faith traditions and whatever, she kind of raised as Catholic, but said whatever, you believe. If you read what Jesus said and you live your life that way and you serve others and you try to be spiritual in that sense, that you will probably do good things and that's what's important in life. So we were really raised in that belief. But I went through life kind of trying to figure out what it was I was going to do to change the world. I knew I wanted to do really good things and had some exposure to organized labor, but not a lot, like probably most of you. My mom was in organizing attempts at her hospital, but I didn't come from a union household. I didn't have union paraphernalia about. I didn't really know that much about organized labor. And I went through school and still searching for what it was that was going to help me change the world. And kind of fell upon, after working for the lieutenant governor for a few years and learning more about unions and doing labor relations, understanding more how much unions can change people's lives and how much of societal ills or things that I saw wrong with society could really be fixed through economic justice. And as a broad term, I think a lot of us and a lot of people would say, of course, there's so much disparity in the haves and the have-nots. There's so many problems with how we treat people and how, the homeless. Everybody kind of recognizes that. But when you really talk about how you fix the disparities and how you really recognize the value of working people, how do you do that? Well, when I started learning about labor unions and organized labor, I realized that is the one way you can do it. What a union is it's basically an organization that works with workers in a workplace. Those workers, rather than having to deal with an employer one-on-one, come together and collectively bargain for their voice in a workplace. As a collective group, they're able to do a lot different things than maybe an individual would, right? If a group of workers come in and complain about a working condition or something that's happening and they have legal representation of a union, sometimes there can be changes that are made. If an individual goes in way too often to complain about something, that individual can be fired for really no other reason. When an individual goes in and says, times are tough, I understand that, but please don't take away my health care, what does the employer say? Yeah, go find another job, right? But when you have your entire workforce coming in as a group and saying, no, we refuse to allow you to take away our health care as long as you can still afford it and we can show you that you can still afford it. That's a much different position of strength to put workers in. Now, a lot of people, and especially after kind of years and years of being told if you're good enough, if you're smart enough, if you apply yourself enough, you should be able to bargain for yourself, right? You should be able to live the American dream, to acquire the American dream. That's what we've kind of been told that throughout our entire lives, I think. And to a certain extent, I think I still tell my kids that. My kids are 8 and 15, and you say, well, if you just work harder in school, and if you get good grades, and you go to a good college, and you'll be just fine. But in reality, so much of our society doesn't operate that way. And unfortunately, there was a time in America, and it kind of coincides with a time when unions were strong, where you had a different balance in the workplace, where you had CEOs of companies who made more than their workers, a lot more, 30 times more than their workers, but understood that the workers had to have a decent type of life as well. Well, now, from the 1970s, when the average pay disparity between a CEO and the average worker was 30 times, we've grown to a point today where a CEO makes on average up to 400 times more than their average worker. 400 times more, right? So the same CEOs who get up and say the economy is so bad, we need to cut jobs, we need to cut healthcare, we need to cut benefits, that's true for everybody but themselves, right? So we created this kind of situation. So what we do within unions is try to work with workers when they want to come together, to empower themselves to be able to have more strength in negotiating the terms and conditions of their employment. Now, a perfect example of this is, how many of you heard about the potential of a grocery worker strike? You guys read that news? We went through months of this, and the media really liked it because a few years ago, quite a few years ago now, we did have a grocery store strike, right? And so it kind of disrupted people's lives. People don't like conflict in San Diego, you know? Don't like to see a picket line, I don't want to get yelled at. So it bothered people, God forbid. And so the media really got into it in San Diego, a lot more impact than other places, at the potential of a grocery store strike again. And those grocery workers, most grocery workers in San Diego at those major grocery stores are represented by a union called the United Food and Commercial Workers. They represent close to 13,000 grocery store workers throughout San Diego and Imperial County. They're one of our largest unions. And so we heard a lot about the economy, of course, you know, always have to cut back because of the economy. We heard about how reasonable the employer was being. If you really read deeply, the employer would say, we just want them to pay $15 a week for health care. And of course, General Society says, that's reasonable. I pay $200 a month for health care. Of course, those grocery workers should pay something. Forget the fact that those grocery workers had worked as a union collectively for years to create the standard where their health care was paid for. And in exchange for that, they didn't bargain increases necessarily in their pay. So the average grocery worker was making about $14 an hour, but they did have free health care. And a lot of the folks, a lot of people who work in the grocery stores, that's a true career for people because they can at least get by with the pay that they're making and provide health care for the families. So the fact that suddenly you're going to have to pay an additional amount really could change the standard. You know, what $90 is to somebody who makes $90,000 a year, $90 a month, compared to somebody who makes, you know, $30,000 a year is much, much different. Those kinds of stories, of course, weren't told in the media. And what else wasn't told is, so those negotiations went on, and eventually one of the most powerful things about unions is the threat of economic sanction, right? Because the only thing, unfortunately, not the only thing, in the faith tradition we try to use a lot of other ways to make employers change, but one of the only things that works in today's society is this threat that you're going to lose a lot of money. In the last grocery strike, the grocery stores lost billions of dollars. I mean, just an outrageous amount of money. Albertsons almost went under. If there was another strike, Albertsons actually would have gone under. So the workers got together, they vote because it's democratic, and they said, if they don't change the proposal, we're going to strike. They voted twice. They got over 92% of the workers to say they were going to strike. And think about what this means. Those workers, many of whom had been on strike in 2003 and understood, a lot of people can say, yeah, I'm going to go on strike. They understood what that meant. A lot of people had lost their houses, they had lost their families, they had lost their marriages, you know, over the fact that they had been on strike for 4 months. Because you get strike pay and some benefits from your union, but you're not making enough money really to make ends meet. We provide a lot of services for them, but they're really jeopardizing their entire livelihood in order to save their livelihood. And it's a brave thing to say, we're willing to go without pay and to strike a company and to possibly, you know, not have a job as a result of the fact that we've worked so hard to have these standards that we want to just maintain. So workers did that, and it wasn't until with the company that they, in this contract, the workers had to give them a 72-hour notice when they were going to strike. They issued a 72-hour notice. The whole time, the companies, I don't think, took them very seriously. You know, the economy's bad. What are these workers really going to do? They're going to look bad in the media. They issued a 72-hour notice, and for the first 48 hours of that, the grocery stores at the negotiating table just said, we'll see. They negotiate as a group. It's kind of an unusual situation, all three of the companies together. We'll see what happens. Well, as the clock continued to tick and they realized that we prepared each of the stores for actually walking out at 7 p.m. on a Sunday, that maybe this was really going to happen. And so in the last hours of the grocery negotiations, the stores themselves put $200 million on the table. In other words, all the months, 4 months of negotiating, when they said, we can't afford any more than this, in those last 4 hours, they said, well, we can afford a little bit more. We can put a little bit more into your health trust fund. We can ensure that the standards don't go down too much. And in the last final 4 hours of those negotiations, the stores put $72 million on the table. Now, what would have happened if those workers had just taken the first contract that they were offered, right? If the individual worker had just been told this is as much as we could do, and they said, okay, that $200 million would have gone into profits for the grocery stores. Now, some people might be okay with that. I'm a little concerned. I'm a little concerned that maybe, you know, the CEOs of Safeway, you know, which owns Bonds, and Kroger's, which owns Ralph's, would go home with another jet maybe, another yacht. And meanwhile, these workers' healthcare have been completely depleted. Unfortunately, right now in our society, without the protection of workers, there's not of unions for workers, there's not a lot of other ways to help level that playing field. And that's kind of how I saw unions, and when I saw it as an opportunity to not only preserve, because right now I'd like to say we're building a union movement, but right now we're under attack. You guys have probably heard bad things about unions, right? Unions are the cause of all problems. It is because of the teachers union, that your third grade teacher caused the economic crisis that is going on right now. This is what, I know, it's kind of funny, right? But this is what we hear if you really dissect what is being said. The greedy teacher, the overpaid trash truck driver, with that enormous $27,000 pension with no Social Security, breaking our system. When in fact, it's a coordinated attack against working people. For years, the only thing that has helped balance out the economy, in my opinion, has been unions. And we talk about those greater societal ills, when we talk about the fact that our public education system is suffering. If you look at the #1 relationship between student achievement, it's how much their parents make, right? So if we could just create a society where two parents or one parent who's raising kids could work, 50 hours a week. That seems like probably a lot to us, but 50 hours a week in the service sector is pretty normal. Could work 50 hours a week and bring home enough money to put a house or some sort of shelter over their kid's head, to have sustained and quality food on the table, to ensure that if they are sick or their child is sick, they can stay home with them. These are the things that are bargained for when they're in a union contract. And without one, which especially in the service sector absolutely is missing. So for me, and we could go through every societal ill, you could probably name it, and I'll tell you why unions make it better, because this is my calling. But it really is an opportunity not just to increase the wages for those who are in the union and the benefits and the working conditions, but also for those who don't have the opportunity to be in a union, and I'll tell you how. One of the biggest industries in San Diego is the tourism industry, right? Everybody loves to come to San Diego, beautiful place. All right, we represent hotel workers in the tourism industry, and about a quarter in San Diego of the, what we call Class A hotels, the nice hotels, are represented by, have union representation. And there's something that happens that's really interesting. It's the correlation between what we call union density, how much of an industry is unionized, and how well the workers do. So I'll give you a little example. In San Francisco, the hotel workers there, it's 90% unionized, highly unionized city. Almost every hotel worker in the city of San Diego is a union hotel worker. As a result, the union standard for the hotel workers, they make $19 an hour, they get full family health care, and they have a little bit in retirement. That's okay, nobody's getting rich off $19 an hour, but you can actually have a standard of living where you can get by when that's provided, especially when they provide health care, right? As a result, that 10% of non-union housekeepers, on average, make $15 an hour and have health care. San Francisco, right? Well, there's something interesting about San Francisco. The price of hotel rooms is about the same as San Diego. The vacancy rates, how often the hotels are full, it's about the same as San Diego. Their TOT, the taxes, are about the same as San Diego. The companies that are operating there, the same companies operating here. And yet, in San Diego, the average wage of a unionized hotel worker, because it's not 90% unionized, it's only 25% unionized, is $15 an hour with health care and a little pension. We just bargained those, and so we're really proud of that. $15 an hour in San Diego for a service sector job is amazing. Places like the Hilton Bayfront and the Hotel Del Coronado and La Costa, that's what they're paying their hotel maids and attendants. A non-union hotel maid in San Diego, on average, gets $9 an hour with no benefits. They have the right to buy family health coverage for about $400 or $500 a month from their employer. If you're making $9 an hour, you can do the math. I'm not a mathematician, anybody a math major, but hopefully not. But it's not, even if you put 100% of your wages into healthcare, the likelihood of you actually being able to achieve that is unrealistic. And so we have a situation with that is slowly rising, and as we can increase the density in the hotel industry for the workers and their wages rise, then those non-union hotel workers who don't have the chance to be union, their wages rise as well, because it's still an economic system that there's a relationship between the standard of the union and those who are non-unionized. So a lot of times when we're bargaining and doing things and picketing for our members, and it's looked at like, why do you just care, you're selfish, you only care about your members. It's really this idea that as you grow density and as you grow standards for your union members, it actually rises up the lowest standards as well. And that's a lot what we do. At the Labor Council, I'm not a union, so I don't represent, you know, a certain sector, like the hotel workers represent the hotel industry, and United Food and Commercial Workers represent the retail industry. I represent all the unions, so we have 132 different unions, 192,000 union families in this region. And so our goal is we support those unions in their efforts, their contract negotiations, as well as if they, you know, want to organize, our organizing efforts. But we also press for legislation that helps all workers. Things like the living wage in San Diego, you know, which is, I think, under attack again to get rid of. The push to have national health care reform. Not as good as we'd like, trust me, but at least pushing the right direction. You may have seen we had a huge fight against Walmart supercenters in an effort to push some truth into what Walmart does as an employer. You know, the nation's, or the world's actually richest employer. We had proposed legislation at the city level and then at the state level to require Walmart to do an economic impact study if they create a supercenter. Because our studies show that when Walmart comes into a neighborhood and they say they create a lot of jobs, what they actually do is they displace a lot of jobs. A lot of small businesses, a lot of union grocery stores. And what you're doing is actually taking jobs that would have been middle class jobs and moving them to low wage jobs. So the benefits that they were stating were not necessarily in a vacuum. You know, it's easy to say, we're going to create 1,200 jobs. Well, does that matter if you're actually getting rid of 1,400 jobs? And if the 1,200 you're creating are a lower standard than those 14, you're actually hurting the economy of the area. We could ask that Walmart have to do an economic impact study if they wanted to come in with a supercenter. And we've had it passed twice now at the city council, had it vetoed twice at the city council, had it overridden once at the city council, and then Walmart and got signatures and forced them to take it back. And then we went to the state, got it through the state assembly and the state senate, and on the last hour of the last day of the session, Governor Brown vetoed it. So someday in my life, I'm going to hold Walmart accountable. That too is a mission, a calling from God I take seriously. But it is a little bit of an obsession. Those people who know me in the room know that I just can't let it go. And I've accepted the fact that even if we get this law in San Diego or in California, it's not going to stop them, but I just want them to be exposed. I just want the truth to come out. And then if people still want Walmarts in their neighborhood, I can't do anything about that. But like, let's have a real discussion about facts and the effects it has on a neighborhood and the surrounding small businesses and the workers and the stress on public services. But we never seem to be able to have that discussion, but we will one day. So those are the things that I do, and a whole lot of other things too. I was just talking before we're very active in the immigrants' rights kind of movement for a variety of reasons. Sometimes people don't quite get it. Historically, unions weren't necessarily on the forefront of pushing for immigrant rights, to be really honest. There were some times when unions, in fact, were in the block of immigration reform. But a lot has changed. I think a lot of acknowledgement that so many of our workers in our workforce, especially in the service sector, have come here as immigrants. And it's not a question of somebody's legal status. I'm not an employer. It's not my problem. It's not my concern. It's their job. What my concern is that every worker here, that number one, that the law has to be abided by, because a lot of times it's not. And that hopefully those workers have the right to come together and also have a voice on the job, because often they're the least likely to be able to. And I'll tell a short story and then I'll open up for questions. The reason I had come to the Labor Council, I was actually the political director, and my boss, who had been the secretary-treasurer, which is an elected position, was going to retire, and he had asked me if I would run for that position. And it was a little different. I was the first woman, first person of color who would be running to head the unions in San Diego. And that's, you know, actually it's been pretty smooth given that, but it was a little questionable. My mom was actually on her deathbed, and I'll never forget. He'd gone and talked to her, which was smart of him, to tell her to tell me that I should do this. And my mom said to me, she goes, "Oh, you've got to do it. It'll be a great social experiment." I was like, "Thanks, Mom." You know, she's like, "Oh, we'll just see if, you know, those old," in her vision of some of the unions, you know, all those old white trades guys could listen to, you know, a young Latina tell them what to do. It'll be great. She goes, "I wish I'd be around to see it." No, but she really encouraged me, and it really has been much smoother than you can imagine. We have a great labor movement in San Diego. But I was still struggling with this because, like I had been talking to some students earlier, you know, trying to find what that was in life. Like, am I going to stay in San Diego and do this? This is like one of the toughest places in America to be a labor leader. Like, this is really, you know, I have 2 small children. My mom was dying. I was getting a divorce, and I'm just like, I don't know if this is quite what I want to take on. I'm just not sure. And there was an organizing strike going on during that time. And it was in Vista, where I had grown up, interestingly, and it was at a laundry facility. Have you guys ever seen a laundry facility? Not a laundry facility like I go wash my clothes because my washing machine's out. So a laundry facility that washes for like uniforms, for like biotech and companies and cities. A large laundry facility called Prudential in Vista. And 14 workers, 14 women, all immigrants, 1 man, 13 women and a man. It was mainly young, immigrant women, had decided to go on strike. They hadn't yet had a union, but they went on strike for union recognition. That is when you can go on strike because you want a good contract, or you could decide to pull out. Now this is very difficult. They're pulling out of their workplace and going on strike, and the company's just hiring other immigrants to come and fill their spot. But you know, they were staying outside the company, picketing every day. And I went with actually our faith community down to talk to the owner of the facility, to talk to him about why what was happening. And I had already talked to the workers about why they were going on strike, and there were a variety of reasons, right? It was a terrible, terrible condition. Laundry facilities are very, very hot, as you can imagine, very dangerous, because they're huge, basically washers and dryers and pressers. They weren't allowed to bring water bottles. They had stopped allowing them to bring water bottles, so they couldn't drink water when they were at work. For no really given reason, but they just couldn't. They could use the water fountain, they said, but the water fountain had been, mold had grown over it, so it's like, kind of like you looked at it, and it was like one of those ones that water would barely come out and there would be mold over it. You'd have to get really close to the mold to get the water out. It was all a deterrent to having the workers drink water, because what happens when you drink water? You get to the bathroom, right? And what happens when you go to the bathroom? You're not working, right? So not only had they done this, but they had created this policy where if you had to use the restroom, you had to go find the manager and explain to the manager that you needed they locked the bathrooms, so you had to go get the bathroom key and ask to use the restroom. Which, you know, as women, we won't get too far into it, but like, you know, gotta go to the bathroom. It's kind of humiliating every time to be like, gotta go to the bathroom again. So they put all these barriers up. Number 1, to not have allow you to cause you to have to use the bathroom, and 2, to humiliate you if you did have to. And then the manager decided if you really had to go to the bathroom, you were apparently back in kindergarten, you know, whether or not you really got to go, or you just making this up as an excuse. So that was part of the reasons. There was also wages and other things, but that's really why they're striking. They talked a lot about respect, right? You can just imagine these working conditions. So we went down and talked to the owner, and he asserted that he was actually a pastor at his church. He was a Christian, and he told us that probably because we introduced ourselves, and I didn't tell him that I actually worked for the unions. I said I went to the church I went to, and that was it. We didn't describe me any differently than anyone else. Our interfaith folks wanted for me to see kind of what a delegation was like. And so he convinced himself that, well, I mean, he probably does believe, I don't know what question somebody's saying, but he started with that. And then, so we asked him, and I particularly asked him, why do you think these women would jeopardize everything, their jobs? You know, they're out picketing half the day and working a different job the rest of the day so that their kids can eat. Why would they do this? Like, what is it that's wrong? Because he was telling us how great it was to work there. And he said, oh, I don't know. We're crazy, you know, we're not really sure why. And I said, well, this is what they told me. They told me that you locked the bathrooms. Or we'd gone through the whole water. Well, there was a reason why the water, he was going to fix the water fountain, and then we got to the bathroom issue. We understand you locked the bathrooms. And he said, well, you have to know, and any of you that done mission work understand this. He's like, when he's talking to me, I introduced myself very definitely as Lorena Gonzalez. I didn't lie about it. So even if I look really pale, I mean, anybody living in Southern California, it should be a red flag when your last name is Gonzalez. But he says to me, he says, well, you know how the Mexican people are. They don't know how to properly use the restroom. They throw the toilet paper everywhere. And so we're locking the bathroom until we can teach these women, because they're new immigrants, how to use the bathroom properly. As a daughter of an immigrant, as a Latina, the mother of Latina, I had two thoughts that immediately went through my mind. Of course, one was, let me go make sure my daughter knows how to properly use the restroom, because I didn't know it was a cultural trait that we had. Perhaps I didn't properly teach her. And the second was just one of deep offense, right? One of deep offense and realization. Not that I needed to be somebody's savior. I wasn't going to save these women from this type of behavior, right? But what better way to spend my life than to empower these women to force this change on the manager? And that's really what union organizing and the union movement's about. It's about realizing that there's still injustice, that workers and unions, still the best way for workers to get ahead and to have a voice and to have protection in the workplace is through a union. And the best thing you can do in life, for me, is to empower people to be able to stand up for themselves and to demand change that all of us would recognize as just basic humanity, right? I mean, unlocking a bathroom. So they ended up getting their union. They ended up with a first contract and a second contract now. The bathrooms were unlocked, the water works, they're allowed to bring water in. And that entire interaction is really what inspired me to stay in the labor movement, and why now when I get invited to things like this, I'm so excited to kind of share that, because I think there is a lot of room for a lot of young people to get excited about the labor movement. And we see a lot of dissatisfaction with the economy, especially people graduating from college and there's no jobs out there, and not understanding, the promises that were made to us about if we just worked hard enough, we could realize the American dream, that it's not our fault, that there's something drastically wrong with our economic systems in the United States right now. That there are organizations out there that really, despite what the media says, despite what the UT will always say, are really geared towards changing that imbalance of power. And that's hopefully what I'm doing. So, questions? And you guys have to have questions. Yes, ma'am.
Since Walmart has been your calling, and my calling for a while, I've retired 14 years, whatever. But I have made a point, especially when we're in Texas, where there's a Walmart every other block, telling those workers, be sure to keep your records. So when you are working here, cleaning up, out, no pay, coming to meetings before the start of the workday, so when you can file a claim for benefits for 3 years after you're unemployed with the Fair Labor Standards Administration. Well, apparently there was a big suit. I heard Department of Labor issued fines. And am I right that Walmart, they didn't have to pay it because it was going to be so big?
No, I think you're getting two different lawsuits crossed. So Walmart has and continues to be fined for exactly this, just unfair labor practices in general. They don't have a union, but still the workers are not even treated necessarily to the basic, under the basic laws that we would expect. For example, if you're asked to come to a meeting before work, you're actually on the clock and have to get paid for that time. Just some basic things that they had systematically created within their organization, and that they have been fined by just about every state, and back wages have been paid. There was also the country's largest class action suit by women in the United States against Walmart for lack of hiring of promotion policies. And it got all the way, they won at the local level, they won at the state level, and got all the way to Supreme Court. It's not local and state, but I am a lawyer, I should know these. But it was appealed all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court rejected it and for a variety of bizarre reasons, rejected the class, and it would have been a huge fine against Walmart. Although the findings were there on the facts, it was the readiness and the timing and a bunch of other procedural issues that caused them to not have to pay it.
Is DOL still kind of like in the regional areas still?
The Department of Labor's been good, and we're actually trying to now, we have a different organizing method with Walmart, and so many of our traditional organizing methods aren't working in today's society, and so it's going to a different, like, direct organizing method with associates, and like teaching individual associates how to assert their rights and to petition their own company for fairness. It's a little bit different that we're attempting to do now, but our Walmart campaign looks a little different in one day. Just to so you guys understand my passion, it's not against Walmart. I understand that it's a company, might have once been good. They, for a long time in California, when people would go in to apply at Walmart, they would give them the application, and when they accepted their application, and they would hire them at about $9 an hour at the most, they'd also give them an application for the Healthy Families Program, which is the state-subsidized health care program. So you have the world's largest, richest company basically saying, go have the taxpayers pay for your health care because we're not going to. And you know, as a taxpayer, and I don't like all the taxpayer arguments because I believe in fairness and I believe we should really take care of everybody, you know. But at the same time, as a taxpayer, why should I be subsidizing Walmart, right? They have more money than God. Not quite, but you know, quite possibly. And it seems disturbing to me, and I can't understand the lack of outrage at things like that. It's like employers should be responsible. We should ensure that employers are responsible. And the rights of stock owners and profits and CEOs shouldn't be so strong that it outweighs not only the rights of those workers, but us as a society as well. And I think that that's my rage against Walmart. Plus, they make everything in China and don't pay the workers well in there, and there's a whole bunch of other reasons not to like Walmart, but they get rid of like all local businesses, and you know, I could probably name the 101 reasons not to shop at Walmart.
Alright, well, this is kind of a very broad topic, but going back to the media, do you think that, you know, you were talking earlier about, you know, everybody thinks the unions are the reason for the problem. Do you think it's the media that's perpetuating that, or that they're just not giving enough information, or that people are just ignoring it? Like, I guess, how does this fit in with the media?
I think I'm always the first to say we have to look in the mirror and say, what did we do wrong here? And there is a certain sense of unions for a long time were very insular. We were taking care of our members, yes, and not doing a good job necessarily of explaining what we were doing to folks. At the same time, you had a number of other factors going on. How many of you learned about unions in school? Okay, what'd you learn? I'm gonna guess. Wait, tell me if this is what you learned, because this is, and I'm talking about, you know, elementary school and high school. So if it's still like it is now, my daughter will say, yes, we had 1.5 pages of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in New York, right? Everybody learned about that? Remember that? Because it had that whole thing with like they locked the doors and the women, girls really jumped from these floors, and we just had the 100th anniversary, so you might have seen these terrible, terrible pictures of it. So people usually learn about that. They may have learned that Samuel Gompers existed, and there was like this industry, child labor might have been thrown in there, there were some child labor laws, and kind of it just ends there, like, and we don't need unions anymore because all this bad stuff, this really, really bad stuff is gone. Well, number one, that really, really bad stuff isn't gone. It's moved to the underground, and it often affects immigrant workforces. You still have people who lock their workers in, believe it or not. You still have people who have child labor basically working on things. You still have these same problems, but it's very much not talked about because it's usually based on people who cannot complain about it or don't have the same abilities to complain as maybe you or I. But secondly, there's a whole other point about labor, and it's about the existence of a middle class. If you look, in fact, at certain segments of our society, for example, at the African American community, 1 of every 5 African American workers works for government, either local, state, or national government. 1 of every 5. That's a pretty big section, right? So when all of these cuts are being made to public service, when you talk about taking away the collective bargaining rights of public sector employees, you are hitting a very large portion of the African American community. And I'll tell you something else. 1 of every 3 African Americans who are in the middle class have a union job. So when you're attacking the very source of power for middle class African Americans. Similar statistics are available for Latinos as well. But when we're talking about a strong middle class and a middle class that extends beyond maybe these like higher skilled professions, like higher skilled, I mean like biotech and research, you're really affecting a large portion of our population when you start eroding the rights of collective bargaining. And so it's not only just the factory fires anymore being locked in somewhere, but it's like how much of a middle class are we going to have and sustain? When you think about middle class jobs, when you think about what they are, a lot of them are in the public sector. They're firefighters and teachers, right? They work for government. They maybe have, their stewardesses or airline attendants. I don't know what they're called anymore. Stewardess is not right. Flight attendants, thank you. I was like, that was not. I said firefighters though, right? I'm really bad at my woman and man language. I'm trying to get better. I just don't care, I guess. I mean, to me, I'm so into equality that I don't think about the terms as much as I should. But I know as students, sometimes I get ding-donged. So we don't say hotel maids anymore either. We're saying hotel attendants now. So just so everybody knows, I'll get my language correct. Language is important, it's just not important to me. I know, like that's my acceptance that it is important to people, but you can, call me a chick and it still doesn't bother me, so that's why I'm trying to make sure I'm politically correct. But so I think that it was largely, there were some concerns with education, obviously. Another thing is media, though. We have so much corporate domination of the media that a lot of what we have, I mean, this is like, I don't want to sound like a conspiracist, but a little bit of like what's going wrong. You really have to look at what the root is and what's causing, why would they attack unions? Why now are we attacking unions? Does anyone really think, and I'm curious, I'm not going to be judgmental, but do you really think unions are what caused this economic crisis? Yeah. I mean, you could get almost any newspaper or TV story to tell you that somehow there was too much power and too much money going to these middle class workers that all of a sudden put the stress on our economy. Well, that came after we were talking about this housing crisis and the banks and Wall Street and all this amazing stuff that happened. If you want it like documented in a way that you can understand, I'm not an economics person per se, but the movie Inside Job does a great job of kind of laying out what happened in our economic structure to cause the economic crisis. And then all of a sudden you have those same companies that perhaps caused it owning media organizations that are saying it's something else. It's kind of like over there. Go look over there. That's what caused this. And you have these companies all of a sudden throughout the Midwest attacking the rights of unionized workers to even have the right to collectively bargain anymore. And as you take away their rights and the union's rights and the power that is really exists out of that, then you have a situation where we're going to continue to elect folks who continue to allow these unregulated markets and things continue to happen. You're going to continue the disparity. So it's not a conspiracy. I don't want to sound like a conspiracist. I don't think 9/11 was an inside job, but I do think that the corporate domination of media has hurt us extensively. And I have enough, even print reporters I have friends who are print reporters at the UT. And I know enough about the changes in stories and the word verbiage that they use, and the fact that you're joking that Rabbi Lori called me a union boss. But where does that come from? I'm nobody's boss. I'm an elected leader of workers. They've chosen me as their leader. A union boss denotes somehow that I'm like bossing people around. The only people I'm a boss of is like the 14 people who work for the Labor Council. I am their manager, but it seems like the terms that they use and the portrayal is so negative. And a lot of times even reporters will tell you, sometimes that's changed by editors or higher ups. So it's interesting, but I don't want to be a conspiracist. Yes?
You said in the 1950s that the CEO made about 30 times more than the average worker.
1970s.
Or 1970s, and that now it's about 400 times more. What would cause such a drastic change?
Well, if you look at graphs, the interesting thing is, at the same time that they started attack, our workforce used to be highly unionized, right? So it used to be basically a third of all workers were in a union. And as they started to attack that unionization through a variety of methods, through legal methods, through consultants who went out to companies and started teaching people how to be union-free, to presidents who started firing people, blackballing people from public service because they exercised their right as a union. That happened under Ronald Reagan, of course. To our air traffic controllers, 10,000 workers who not only lost their jobs, but were prevented from having any kind of federal employment until Bill Clinton came to office and reversed that. So they lost their jobs, their pensions, everything. And air traffic controllers, there's kind of like not a lot of non-government air traffic controllers for those 10,000 workers. So all these things were happening at the same time, right? You have this cottage industry of consultants law firms who now are created in order to advise companies how to keep the union out. You have union rules by the National Labor Relations Board that used to provide a balance between the worker and the employer to decide what the fair playing field was in forming a union. Get totally out of whack. Basically, the consequences for doing things illegal in an organizing campaign, for example, for an employer, is nothing more than a slap on the wrist. It's basically hiring back your worker. So the consequences, there's no real penalties, right? You're going to face a union in your workplace, you just fire the union organizers, and maybe 3 years from now, a judge is going to decide you fired them illegally, and you will have to compensate that worker. That worker probably wouldn't have found another job. You only have to compensate that worker for the time that they were unemployed. That is the entire penalty for breaking the law for an employer. So all this stuff was happening, and so union membership started to decline drastically. It is very tough to organize a union in today's legal structure and labor law, and with everything that's been set up. And as a result, as unions declined, you saw this inverse rise of the difference between the wages of employees, of workers, and the rise of the wages of CEOs. So I think anytime you get anything out of balance like that, laws that are out of balance that favor one group over another, it's weird because, like, in my position, I do a lot of advocating for workers, and I always think the workers are right, and I always want to push the envelope on the workers. But I do that not because I think that I do think I'm right in what I'm doing, but we ask for everything in order to get something, right, to provide that balance. That balance, even with all of us who are working for all of that, is totally off. And so as you take away the power of workers to be able to collectively bargain and voice the concerns of like how income is distributed, then you have that imbalance. And unfortunately, greed and society kind of take over what used to be a lot more level playing field.
We have time. I'm sorry, let me just insert real quick. I know that, Lorena, you also have something else tonight.
Oh, no, it's good. I took care of it.
Okay, all right.
Child
So we have a little more
care
time than I thought?
Yeah.
Great.
I took care of my child care issues.
So we will finish no later than 1:30, just as our regular commitment. But so we have about 20 minutes of time if you have that for us.
Whatever.
Wonderful.
If you guys get bored about asking questions, don't feel like you need to. It's fine too. Or you can ask me anything, but I can share a question.
Okay, so what do you think about the idea of like labor unions and small businesses? Because like, for example, during the time like when Cesar Chavez was very popular, like he went to like small like nurseries and stuff and tried to unionize workers there. I know that like healthcare is one of the largest things that small businesses like pay. Like, do you think that unions negatively affect small businesses because they're asking for so much when like it's harder for them to pay for those things than corporations?
Okay, so did everybody hear her question? Unions and small businesses. So I don't know of any instances where Cesar Chavez tried to organize what could be considered a small business, to be very honest. He targeted large, okay, they'll call them family farms, but my version of what my family grows and what a large family in the Central Valley grow are much different. So I think if you look at union organizing, there's two answers to that. Number one, unions just don't go, it's not worth it to go in and organize small businesses, quite honestly. The time commitment, the effort, the legal cost, the reason that our biggest employers are the ones who are unionized is because really that's the target. And also you change the standard. If you change, for example, if we change Walmart's standard, we don't have to worry about the bicycle shop down the street because they're going to start to be, the wages for those workers go up as well. We don't concentrate on family-owned small businesses. You can't even, it wouldn't even make sense. You don't create that kind of situation. So for the most part, it doesn't happen to small businesses. I know there's a lot of fear when we were trying to trying to push for labor law reform. I think the small businesses were really nervous that we're gonna go, all of a sudden organize all these mom and pop shops, which of course we were like, we're really worried about the big industries right now. But at the same time, that being said, one of the reasons we push for healthcare reform and to have some sort of comprehensive healthcare reform that I don't think nearly went far enough and is not going to solve any of the problems is because of the cost for small business. We have to drive down the cost of healthcare for everybody because everybody should be able to get employer-based health insurance. The only way that's going to happen is if the health care insurance companies basically through market demand and through regulation are forced to charge less. So we try to create a situation where it wouldn't be so onerous for a small business to be unionized, but you'll find there are small businesses that are unionized, some by choice, some by tradition, and some because if the workers got together and decided to form a union, they're stuck with it. And I've never seen, although I'm sure somebody could find an example for me, but I've never seen like a union go in to break the company. Not all union workers get health care. In smaller businesses, it might not be possible. We try to bargain for that. And we often try to ensure that our workers can advocate for that. But the contracts that are sought, it's not like we're seeking the same thing at a company that is doesn't have the same profit margin as somebody else. So a lot of people who work for unions are researchers, right? A lot of research goes in before you go in to ask and bargain for a contract because no union wants to break a company. Then there's no jobs there, and there's no union workers. There's no availability. So a lot of that is taken into account. Yes.
Prior to hearing you speak, you talk about like personal experience with unions, or like what you hear about unions from people you know. Like most of the people that I'd ever heard talk about the union, they're making angry notes on their Facebook, like, I just got my paycheck. Stupid union, like taking my paycheck, like.
Union dues.
I was just about to ask that.
Where do you fit in people who aren't happy with
Their
their union in that spectrum of like saying that like people are the union is the workers?
Can I add on that? Can you explain dues a little bit? Because I think that's where people do, get upset without understanding it.
Right.
Yeah.
And shame on a union that doesn't explain it, and shame on a worker who doesn't understand
Or
the
even just
need
the
for it.
general public.
So, well, in the general public, like honestly, when somebody who is not in a union complains about union dues, I want to be like, you know what? It's not your money, quite honestly. Union dues are necessary in order to pay for representation. And so nobody is required to join a union in America. I cannot tell you that it is a requirement to join a union. Now, you may have to pay fees to that union if you're in a closed shop, right? So you may have to actually pay dues to the union. That's usually what gets people angry. They don't want to be part of the union. And there's that part of me that gets fed up, right? That goes, okay, then go get another job that's not union and see the difference. Because I guarantee you, even what they're taking out in wages, you're not going to be able to make what you make in a union shop. So for example, in retail, the biggest complaints usually come from people who work at Vons or I get it the most, or Albertsons or somewhere else. They're like, they're taking my union dues. Well, yeah, you know what you would be making if you didn't have a union shop and you didn't have union organizers and representation and a legal staff and people bargaining that contract, you wouldn't even be making the difference in wages. Somebody has to pay for that. It's not, nobody's getting rich or should be getting rich off of union dues. However, there does have to be advocacy for changes in legislation. There does have to be a representational cost. So that has to be paid for. And if you have the ability to be in a closed shop where you're getting the benefits of a union, this isn't always the case, but when there are, like the grocery stores, if you go get a job at one of those major grocery stores, you have to pay union dues, honestly. But you're getting a huge benefit from that as well. And so it makes people uncomfortable, it makes them unhappy, but that's kind of my, response to that. And if they don't like their union, if there's something wrong, I always tell people too, this is part of go change it. Every union is a democratically elected structure. Every union president has been elected by their members. Every organizing committee, every contract committee, everything that we do is direct representation, direct democracy. So if there's something you don't like, then you need to get involved and change it. And it's the same as people who complain about, I guess, taxes, right?